Hey guys, welcome back to more AFK Arena. In today's video, we are doing my top 5 carry heroes. Now, we're going to lay down some ground rules before we get into it. So when I was making this list, it's going to incorporate up until your whole team is 240. So this is going to be heroes that are carrying your team, but they're going to be leveled 20 to 40 levels ahead of the rest of your team. Another thing I considered was how good they are just as a general carry, how good they are progressing into the end game as a team player, how free-to-play friendly they are to obtain, a lot of those factors. So I tried to incorporate everything into this list. For instance, something that everyone knows is going to be on the list is Shamira. Yes, she falls off late game. She does have a niche use in the end game for the Nomura boss, but she is so free-to-play accessible that everyone can build her, and she is a really strong carry and always good for anything like Labyrinth and all that sort of stuff. So those are the kind of criteria I was looking at. Carry hero. The other thing that I want to mention is there's no Celestial Hypergenes in here because they're just harder to get, so I just wanted to leave them off. Yes, Wukong, if you have the right RNG and there's enough events that give Wukong copies, people can do Wukong as a carry, and he is a fantastic carry as well, but because it's not going to be accessible to as many people, because just getting him from the Labyrinth store isn't going to boost your copies enough, so that's why he's not here. But definitely for anyone up to level like 100, 120, Wukong is an absolute savage, so definitely use him. Other things, something like Gwyneth, my girl, I had to mention her. She used to be amazing, but then they reverted her skill up so that only from level 221 forward, she gets to stun enemies with her arrows. So from 221 forward, Gwyneth's amazing. Before then, she lacks that bit of control that she used to have. And then finally, I wanted to mention agility heroes. Any damage dealer that's agility can be a really solid, really solid carry when they're leveled above, because they dodge a lot. And like I said, if they're damage focused, so like Rain isn't going to be one, but something like a Thane can actually carry pretty well. However, the reason things like that haven't made the list is because even though they might be really good carries in the early game, the lack of use of them in the late game takes them off the list, and they're not as easy to access as a Shamira, so that also drops them below that and all that sort of stuff. You guys get what I'm trying to say. Anyway, let's get into it. Number 5 on the list is going to be Belinda. Now, the reason she made it to the list is because of the free-to-play ways to obtain her. Obviously, I did say earlier that you want to have not just damage, but you want to have either control or some sustain or something like that. Now, Belinda still works decent. You can put her in the front row, because normally with your carry hero in the early game, because they're power leveled, you want to put them in the front row. They take a bit extra damage, but they can take it because they're power leveled, and then also it gets them to their ult faster. Now, the thing with Belinda, you can put her in the front row. She lacks the sustain and all that stuff, but because her burst is so big, anyone that's there, if she does get towards using an ult, is pretty much going to be dead instantly, and it's going to refresh her energy, and then she's going to be able to kill the rest of them. She also does have great synergy with Rowan and Lucius, obviously being a light bearer to give you that faction bonus, and Lucius and Rowan are absolute gods early game, and that's where she's really going to find the extra benefit of having that faction bonus. She does also have the added bonus of being strong against Riz and in other boss fights, so it's going to allow you to get decent scores in those boss fights as well. However, I wouldn't upgrade her signature item any more than 20 if you were really pushing it, because she does fall off a bit later. She still does have very good uses later on in the game, but there's just better options to save those faction emblems for signature items. But Belinda, all in all, not the greatest, but still has some decent viability, and like I said, she still has some niche uses in the late to end game, but not as broad as in the early game. Number 4 on the list, I put Aioli. Now, Aioli has a really weird progression as a carry hero. So in the first like 100, maybe 120 to 140, he is incredibly strong. His damage in the early game scales really well. He's got the passive AoE that keeps ticking. He's got that stun that he does AoE all the time. He's got his hypodermic healing, which he's going to just heal himself over time. His ultimate heals him a heap, increases attack and haste, giving him some good damage. So he's got good AoE control, amazing survivability, and he's just pretty much a beast. And like I said, especially in that really early game, he's going to dominate. Now, he falls off in this weird middle period until he's ascended and you can get 3 furniture. His signature item helps as well. But the reason he made this list is because he's such a savage in the early game. You pull 1 or 2 copies of him in your first like 30 summons, you're pretty much set for those early chapters. He's an absolute beast. Just put some support heroes behind him and you're fine. Like I said, you really need to get lucky on the RNG and get the copies. And then if you can get him ascended and get 3 furniture on this guy, remembering that from about chapter 4, you can start gifting, receiving gifts from friends in the Oak Inn. So you should, by the time you get a hero ascended, have some furniture pulls to do, and hopefully you can get one of his and then maybe do a select for 2 others. Not optimal, but you get what I'm saying. If he has the furniture, he has that stacking attack buff, which is absolutely insane, and it makes him an absolute savage. So the other thing is he just becomes really good in the late game. He keeps becoming more and more relevant as more people start using him in the late game. So just a fantastic all-rounder. Does have that little slump in the middle when you're sort of like at like 160, 180 and he's only at mythic. But as soon as you boost him to ascend to get that furniture, he becomes an absolute savage again. Hope that makes sense, but that is Aioli. Number 3 on the list is going to be Shamira. Now, for free-to-play players, I put her up higher because she is so easy to obtain with the Labyrinth store. You can pick her up very, very easily, and she's just a fantastic early game carry. Whenever she's power leveled, it means her AoE is doing a lot of damage. She has more survivability. Obviously, she's got Soul Siphon, which is going to heal her, but then she's got her ultimate, which also heals her at the end, and then from level 161 past, it's going to heal her during dealing damage, which is absolutely fantastic. She's a beast of a carry. However, for pay-to-play players who are summoning more and have more options to build, I would give Shamira a miss, because when you get into the end game, she really does fall off. In the end game, her basically only position where she is useful is going to be the Nomura Twisted Realm boss. The problem is once you get to end game and everyone's 240, she can't sit in the front row anymore because enemies just deal too much damage, and then also her scaling is no longer 20 to 40 levels above the rest of your team, meaning her AoE isn't going to be dealing as much damage to the enemies, and that end game period becomes a bit more about burst than the steady damage that she can do with the healing, because she's going to get killed before the healing really takes effect, and also the damage just isn't going to be great enough. Now, even for free-to-play players, I wouldn't recommend going past level 20 on her signature item. The investment from 20 to 30 is just better saved for other heroes into the late game. She is really going to be the specialist that you use for that early game progression to really boost you up, because she is fantastic for that, and she is also always really good for things like Labyrinth, Peaks of Time, and all that sort of stuff. Just that cleave is always really nice, but like I said, don't invest too heavy into her signature item, just because eventually she will drop off and she will have that one niche use of the Twisted Realm Nomura boss. Number 2 on the list is going to be Stitchy. Now, Stitchy is Damon, for those playing at home. Damon is one that I haven't properly tested as a main carry on an account. However, through the early game, you can just tell he's going to be strong. And also the fact that when you move into the late game, he's one of the best carries in the game as well. So he's just really, really strong. He has a lot of damage mitigation, but it also has damage that scales on the enemy's max HP, so it's going to deal some decent damage the whole way through. And like I said, the main reason he is number 2 on this list is his viability in the late game as a PvE carry. So he's going to be good the whole way through. Even if it turns out that he's a little bit worse than Shamira, I still feel like he would be better than Shamira if you can get the copies and ascend him enough in the early game. However, even if Shamira creeps in on him in the early game, I would still put him above her on the list, because he's that hero that you're building to invest into later on in the game. He is ridiculous in the late game. His self-mitigation along with that HP scaling damage is huge. He also gets a little bit of healing from his doll Stitchy, and he also has a single target stun from Stitchy as well. So he's going to deal amazing damage, but also have some really good shielding and self-sustain and a little bit of control. He's an absolute beast, plus he's one of the coolest looking characters in the game, so he gets number 2 on the list. And finally, for number 1 on the list, it is going to be Iron. Now, the reason I have Iron as number 1 is he has a great synergy with the early game support heroes, which are going to be wilder focused. You've got things like Leica, Tassi, Nomura, Arden. They're all fantastic, and he has the faction bonus with them, which really helps. Not only that, he deals huge amounts of damage, but also has that control of being able to draw in enemies, also using his ultimate to freeze once you get the signature item, which is really nice. The other thing is he's such a good late game hero that you can fully invest to max out his signature item. You can invest in his furniture. You can basically just invest deeply into this guy and have no regrets about it. It will require you, once again, free to play, you might not pull the copy, so you might not be able to do this. However, the investment that you put into him is never going to be wasted, because he becomes such a beast in both PvP and PvE in the late game. He is incredibly vital to a lot of teams due to the way his Vortex ability drags the enemies in at the start of the battle, has so many good synergies and is incredibly strong. Also, he does, with the signature item, have that freeze with the ultimate, which is really strong as well. He has the ability to ignore shields and defense, which once again is incredibly strong against things like Lucius and stuff like that. So just all around amazing damage dealer. He's a leather wearing unit, meaning he has some sustainability where he can get a lot of dodges when he's power leveled, but then also he has an incredible amount of control and just insane viability moving into the late game. In my opinion, my favorite account was the account that I used him as my main carry. I got really lucky with pulls early on, made him my main carry, and never regretted it. He's just absolutely fantastic, and he never gets old. He's the kind of hero that, due to the ability to drag in those enemies, he is never going to be bad in the game, because that is always going to have a synergy with some form of hero that is going to be strong with that synergy. So even if they nerf his damage and all that stuff, as long as he still has that ability to suck enemies in, he's always going to find a synergy and a place to be in the meta. And plus, like I said, he can ignore defense, ignore shields, all that stuff, dealing huge amounts of damage. So that is going to be Iron at number 1. Let me know what you think of the list. The other thing that I just want to say quickly is the Celestials and Hypergeans. Yes, they're strong. I didn't include any of them in the list just because, you know, 99% of players probably ain't going to get them as a carry, because the amount you'd have to spend is going to be ridiculous. Once again, any agility wearing heroes is going to be a really strong early game carry too if you get the RNG and pull them. Even things like Kaz, if you get a lot of copies, Titus can even be strong, but I'd still recommend trying to go for these ones instead, because those guys do drop off a little bit in the late game as well, so it's only for early game investment that you'd be doing them. Other things like Thane when he's power leveled, but then he comes very average towards the late game. But hey, the other thing is, if you just want to have fun with a hero as your carry hero, I've done it on several accounts. Go ahead, do it. It's all about having fun, and that is the big thing. The last thing that I did want to mention is you do have heroes like Pharrell, who is amazing, Sophia, who is amazing in the late game as well, but I didn't put them on the list because they're not as good in the early game as a carry. Pharrell is still a great option to put in as a support in the early game, but Sophia sort of really shines once your whole team is 240 and you can get a big balanced team around her. But once again, she is fantastic. The other downside of her in the early game is that she is a mauler, so she's not going to have synergy with any of the other good heroes that are going to be support heroes in the early game, so she does drop off a bit. Hopefully that covered enough disclaimers that no one's going to get angry at me in the comments, but let me know. Anyway, guys, that is my list of my personal top 5 early game carries. Tried to cover it as well as I could, explaining free to play versus pay to play in that, but thanks for watching. Hope you have an awesome day, and I look forward to seeing the next one. Cheers.